Every time I think about the damage that's been done, the anger wells inside me till I'm almost overcome. I want to tear the moon out of the sky and drop the sun. Why do I feel so all alone, like I'm the only one? Even though your eyes are open, they may never ever see. Your mind may never comprehend this sinful subtlety. Your heart may never hunger for the truth that sets you free. Your soul may know the darkness of divine eternity. Like petty thieves who plunder in the shadows of the night, they break inside and enter through the windows of your mind. How can I control this poisoning of the soul? These lies that blind your eyes, blinded by the lies. Have your eyes been blinded by the
Ernst Zundel is a towering figure in the worldwide historical revisionist movement. He was born in 1939 in a small town in the Black Forest region of southwestern Germany. He immigrated to Canada at the age of 19, where he quickly became highly successful as one of Canada's most talented artists. Setting aside a thriving career, Ernst Zundel resolved to dedicate himself to the great task of redeeming the sullied reputation of his fellow Germans, accused of having gassed 6 million Jews. A dauntless activist in a struggle against seemingly insurmountable odds and invincible adversaries, no historical revisionist has been more tenacious, dedicated, and courageous. His friends see Zundel as an unusually alert and sensitive individual with a keen understanding of human nature. He inspires confidence, loyalty, and affection. His political opponents see him differently. For the past 20 years, they have tried to silence him by any means, fair or foul.
Ernst Zundel is in jail, not for any crime he's committed, because he's charged with no crime. He is in jail for his political beliefs, because his beliefs cross the interests of certain powerful people in Canada. Ernst Zundel is one of the victims of Canada's so-called anti-terrorism legislation. Ernst Zundel is in prison, allegedly, because he's a threat to national security. If there ever was a corrupt and bogus charge, that is it. Ernst Zundel's case involves secret testimony. Every time he's been in court, prior to his appearance, the judge has heard secret testimony from, we don't know who. We don't know who's presented the testimony. We, of course, have no idea what was said. And this is a complete destruction of the rights that we have fought for 1,000 years for in Anglo-Saxon justice. And one of those rights was the right to face your accuser and to know the charges against you. We have gone right back to the age when kings tossed their political opponents in jail in the Tower and threw away the key. The right of habeas corpus has all but been erased from this country. And all of that to fight terrorism. But who's the so-called terrorist? A political dissident, a man who has done what? Published. Some people like what he published, some people don't like what he published. That used to be called just plain freedom. Ernst Zundel is a pacifist. He has been a pacifist all his life. He never resorted to violence, and he always counseled his supporters, friends, and followers to do the same, to be peaceful. Ernst Zundel has always fought through the courts. He had 11 different bails during the 1980s and 90s. He fulfilled all of them. The only legitimate reason to keep a man in prison prior to a hearing is if that man is likely not to appear. And here's the big joke. If Ernst Zundel somehow left the country, the Canadian government would be only too happy. He is in jail, in solitary confinement, with only the most rudimentary of writing materials for one reason only, and that is to break his resolve to make him say, I give up, send me back to Germany.
He has a regular sized pen. The guards break it in half because it could be a weapon. Can you imagine? My husband, who has never hurt anybody, who is known as a pacifist, who has built a career on being a pacifist, he is the Gandhi of the West. How dare these people say he's a danger to the security of Canada? He is a man of strong convictions. He wants to restore honor to the German people because he loves his country. It's only natural. But to build him up as this scarecrow, this terribly dangerous man, this is absolute nonsense. And even his enemies know it. They don't claim that he is dangerous. They say somebody might read something that he might write in the future and might do something that is against the law. Well,
Zundel is probably best known for his central role in the Canadian Great Holocaust trials of 1985 and 1988. These political trials have been the closest thing anywhere to full-scale debates on the Holocaust issue and how to sort fiction from facts. In the 1985 trial, lasting 7 weeks, for the first time ever, Holocaust survivors and Holocaust historians were closely and critically questioned under oath about their claims and views. This netted him very powerful detractors in the Jewish community worldwide.
This was the only country where they had no military and that drafted young men against their will to serve an army, to go and kill people. And I tried in all kinds of other countries, but everywhere I turned there were military drafts. And so I came here, haven't regretted it, in spite of the official hypocrisy that persists in this country. I came here because I wanted to make a new life in a free land. And for the first 10 years of my life in Canada was terrific. But I had a real wake-up call when I tried to apply for citizenship and was turned down without being given a reason. I still don't have the reasons. You know, there is the Ernst Zundel that the police has in its files. There's the Ernst Zundel that the Canadian Jewish Congress loves to hate. There's the other Ernst Zundel that my breath kicks around. I am, in fact, a human rights activist. My misfortune is that I am white and German. The Supreme Court acquitted me after the state, pimping for powerful Jewish interests, prosecuted me for 9 long years up and down the courts, only to be told by the highest court in the land that what I had done was absolutely sanctioned and constitutionally protected. If I was a member of the Zionist lobby that has conned itself to a pinnacle of influence and power in this society based on victimhood that they were hard done by my German people in the Second World War, I maybe would also hate a guy like the Paul Revere of the Germans to come along and ring the bells for freedom. What the persecuted of yesterday are today, they are the persecutors. They are the people that get up in the pulpit to excite the public odium against people like myself. They are the ones that call me hate monger, hater, Nazi, fascist. I don't go around excoriating them because they worship at the feet of gangsters and murderers and terrorists like Begin and Shamir and Rabin. Occupiers who, with a military jack, would grind Palestinians in their own native land into the ground. Who the hell are these people to, for 50 years, keep the Germans basically down under their jackboot by whining about things that now it turns out most likely never happened to them? That's why I'm called the hate monger, because truth hurts. They hate the truths that I tell. I want equality for German people around the world. And we are tired of begging for it. For 50 years, we have borne the sign of Cain by a powerful media avalanche that the Allies unleashed against the German people after the war, when there was no German government to speak for them, when the governments failed, and when Quisling governments rule over your own people, then it's time for ordinary citizens to get up and ring the bells for freedom. I mean, the absolute best tradition of any human rights struggle that there ever was. Only mine is German. And so, of course, what is the easiest thing to do? To tarnish me with all the alleged, imagined, concocted, and brewed up hate stories that Hollywood ever poured out. I was a refugee from militarism that the Allies imposed on the German people after they defeated them. I am a descendant of a very proud people, and I'll be damned if I'm going to let some Turk from the backwoods of Quebec tell me that I should be seen and not be heard. Every single night I am confronted by hate programs because of the prejudices of the ruling oligarchy in Canada that runs this place like a banana republic. No German voice has ever been listened to, and this society does it at its peril, by the way, because it robs itself of the input of a very vital ethnic group. And so when I came over here, I couldn't speak English and I couldn't speak French. I believed in the Holocaust. I believed the Jews had been hard done by. I believed the Allies with their democracies were wonderful. Until I was able to speak English, when I learned it here at night school and at university. And then I suffered culture shock, because I suddenly realized that all this was ultimately nothing but wartime propaganda. And as I began to interview people from both sides, I found that these stories that are today told as history are nothing but rerun newsreels and press releases and Allied propaganda stories. When I went to night school, and when my kids went to high school, had Canadian-produced textbooks right here in Whitby, Ontario, that still rehashed the First World War cadaver story, that the Germans made soap out of human cadavers. And the crucified Canadian story. It took the CBC 77 years before they finally exposed the fact that the story of the crucified Canadian soldier in Belgium in World War I was nothing but a Canadian propaganda lie. And I accused the Canadian oligarchy, the Canadian Banana Republic-style oligarchy, this network that is what we call in German verfilzt, interwoven, intertwined between media, government, secret societies, and so on, and the churches. They have done wrong to this, what has been the third largest ethnic group in the country and the second largest ethnic group in Alberta and in British Columbia. So here is the anomaly in the typical way this society works, that these people finance propaganda against Germans and people like myself, revisionists, tarnishing us as hate mongers, haters, racists, bigots, and so on, with government funding. And then when we talk back and defend ourselves and point out that many of the accusers that vilify us so mercilessly are Jews, then we suddenly then become the anti-Semites and the Nazis. Now, what the hell is that? We are not some down and out people that come here begging. All we want is what is rightfully ours. Get off our back. Let us get onto an even playing field. If you're not going to give us fairness in the courts and in the human rights commissions and in the public generally and in textbooks, then get out of the way so that we can at least present our own case. I'm for, first of all, creating equality for my German, equal access to all the organizations of this state. The people that come and demonstrate with me outside TV stations, libraries, and so on, are ordinary people made up of many ethnic groups and nationalities, because I only harp on the Germans because I am a German, and I wouldn't presume to speak for the Lithuanians, the Estonians, and so on, but they too have a beef, the Hungarians, in this country. You know, just because white immigrants are not trendy with these Marxists in their offices in ivory towers doesn't mean that we don't have hearts, souls, minds, desires, wishes, dreams for our own ethnic groups. Multiculturalism was supposed to mean that we enhance and enrich and create a level playing field for all.
Michael Hoffman II, a former Associated Press wire writer and noted cyber activist, recalls the two trials, where an enormous quantity of compelling evidence refuting the Holocaust extermination story was presented to the court, thereby making it part of the permanent public record. Never before had those known as Holocaust survivors been questioned on the veracity of what they claimed.
We walked up to the courthouse steps and were confronted by the most unsightly group of people that you ever see outside a courtroom.
They were terrorists, and it was outrageous that the government of Canada allowed them to congregate there for the express purpose of trying to assassinate you and to kill your attorney and your supporters. And they made their very best effort. And if it had not been for some young men that you had gathered around you that without pay voluntarily came forward to protect your person and the person of your attorney, as well as your research staff, serious bodily harm would have come to you. And I believe that Samizdat has film documentation of that, videotape documentation of the assault on your lawyer and on you on the courthouse steps of a Canadian courthouse in January of 1985 by Jewish terrorists who were out to kill you. Of course, you were tried twice, once in 1985 and another time in 1988. And the so-called Holocaust survivors took such a beating in 1985, and I mean by that intellectually, under Doug Christie, your defense lawyer's cross-examination, that not one of them dared to return to the 1988 trial. So it really was the revisionist think capital of the world during your trial, and I wonder if that unique experience will ever be repeated. In a sense, the enemies of truth had attempted to persecute you, to jail you, and yet, by virtue of their own vindictiveness, they ended up putting together a revisionist brain trust that would have never come together had it not been for this attempt at denying you your rights. So for me, the special value of that 1985 trial is that your defense attorney was able to face down these allegedly unimpeachable, infallible Holocaust survivors and cut their testimony to ribbons.
One of the leading lights of the Holocaust lobby was, of course, the number one witness against me. He gave lengthy testimony and didn't show up during the second trial. Any idea why?
I think the Robert Foresson leading your team, it was really a debate between Foresson and Hilberg using the excellent offices of Doug Christie as the mouthpiece for Dr. Foresson. And we did elicit from Hilberg some amazing statements which, if you or I were to say it on this television program, the ADL, the thought police that monitor our every word, would say it was an outrage. But yet a Jewish Holocaust historian admitted that there was no written order for Adolf Hitler ever ordering any extermination of the Jews. No scientific document indicating that there had been a gassing. Well, these were world historic revelations that Doug Christie was able to elicit, and I think that Dr. Hilberg was so shaken by having to admit these things that he in no way wanted to come for the second trial.
It's interesting, his reaction when I looked at his face when Doug Christie asked him for one scientific report on gassings. One scientific report, one autopsy report. And he had to say, I am at a loss. I am at a loss.
And this is the top Jewish expert. We've always wanted rational debate. We've never asked for anything else. We didn't want to be drawn into a courtroom situation, which you and I both feel is essentially a Talmudic arena. At the same time, however, they have not allowed us a debate. Deborah Lipstadt, the author of the liturgy, the chief liturgy that reporters are supposed to turn to when they have a question about Holocaust revisionism, the denial book, because she doesn't want us to be known as Holocaust revisionists, but rather as Holocaust deniers. She is the one that has laid down the law for all reporters who don't wish to be labeled or tarred with the expression anti-Semitic, that we are not to be debated. Well, why do you fear debate? If our position is so flat-earthist and ridiculous, they should welcome debate. The reason they fear it is for the prima facie evidence that your trials have presented. When they bring in their best debaters and their best stars in an effort to send you to jail, they're cut to pieces by revisionist research. And that's why they won't debate, and that's what your trials have proven. If we can meet them in free and fair debating ground, they will lose. Because what they are suggesting, that there were these massive exterminations, is a tissue of fabrication.
These people haven't defended one single German that has been assailed over the last 38 years that I've been in this country. Not one single time has a Canadian bureaucrat that sucks his big paycheck out of the public and gets paid by a taxpayer ever come to the defense of the beleaguered German community. And when I finally took up where the state should have been all along and the institutions of the state, I got charged criminally, and I'm once again charged criminally. Because I defend my ethnic group against this media-born and media-agitated hatred.
Zundel's trial 2 years ago ended with a theatrical flourish and a 15-month jail term.
Good evening. Ernst Zundel is spending his first night in jail. He was sentenced to 15 months for publishing a pamphlet that claims the Holocaust never happened. The courtroom was packed as the judge handed down the sentence. For those who brought Zundel to trial, the judge's words were exactly what they wanted to hear.
Judge Hulock called Zundel a neo-Nazi propagandist, a danger to the community, with the unmistakable instincts of the street disturber. The judge added, he published with a fixed intention of destabilizing the Canadian community.
Locke called Zundel a neo-Nazi propagandist and described his publication as a blatant, false, and racist tract. He called Zundel a danger to society. Then Zundel was handcuffed and let out.
He said all the things that needed to be said about the victims and how they were maligned.
A message has been sent out to all the Zundels of this world, particularly in Canada, that the hatred and hate-mongering will not come cheap.
And there was mounting pressure for deportation.
We are going to begin tomorrow demanding that the government deport Ernst Zundel immediately.
Why do we need troublemakers here? He's not a Canadian citizen, so let him go back to where he came from.
Today, Toronto's Jewish community is not satisfied. They want Zundel out of the country and are calling on the federal government to initiate deportation proceedings immediately.
Zundel was hustled out of court this afternoon right by waiting reporters amidst very tight security. He didn't have much to say except that the trial was worth it just for the publicity alone.
Well, we told the truth and it needed to be told, and we did it civilized, in a civilized manner, and I think we all did a good job.
Nothing that these people can heave at me will make me feel any different. One of our reporter friends from our local newspapers has called me. Champagne has been opened in the night press conference, and undoubtedly is going to be dancing in the streets in certain quarters of Toronto tonight.
Pure and fast.
Yeah. However, it might turn out to be a little premature, like so many of these celebrations might be, because I think that after the dust has settled, I might still have the last laugh on those people, you know. They're going to take me out of circulation, I'm quite sure. Judge Locke will see to that. Griffith, in a press conference outside the courthouse, said that an example must be made with Zundel to prevent others from thinking these unofficial thoughts. And I'm quite sure that that's what they will do. And they have the power to do it, so I don't want you to be too disappointed. I think that we're looking at a jail term of some duration.
Zundel supporters picketed the University Avenue Immigration Building during the 43-minute hearing before adjudicator J. David Benning, and then Zundel got the word. Zundel fits the description under the act, and he must be ordered deported. Ernst says somebody wants him gone in a hurry.
Interesting, too, the government already wanted to get documentation and applied for a citizenship surge in January while the trial was still going on.
The federal government has set the wheels in motion to determine if Zundel should be deported. McDonald outlined the steps that will be followed and which could end in Zundel's return to his native West Germany.
Zundel arrived with his obligatory van load of helmeted supporters. Ernst was wearing his bulletproof vest.
It was the usual Zundel Street Theater. Placards, hard hats, the usual crush of reporters and photographers, and as usual, a gimmick. Zundel's face blackened by shoe polish.
I didn't achieve very much for my ethnic group, working as a white visible minority. Now I'll try it this way.
As he entered the immigration office, Zundel indicated he expected to be deported, but warned he would exhaust the appeal process.
So there's immigration appeal boards, there's refugee status, and so on. Oh, the Canadian system has lots of things to appeal to, and I will appeal to every one of them.
Inside the closed hearing, an immigration adjudicator made what amounted to a simple factual finding that Zundel is a landed immigrant with permanent resident status, that he was found guilty of an offense with a penalty greater than 6 months in jail. After that, the deportation order was automatic. But
okay, good.
It was all over in about an hour.
We have a verdict. Shylock has his pound of flesh. This is the deportation order.
Tonight, on The National, facing deportation, Ernst Zundel is ordered out of Canada.
His deportation was never in doubt. Any landed immigrant sentenced to more than 6 months in jail on a criminal charge is automatically kicked out of the country.
Mr. Zundel's trial, which lasted most of January and February, focused national and international attention on a man who till then had been little known.
We have done for Ernst Zundel what he could not even in his wildest dreams have done for himself. We have given him a forum. We have given him a measure of respectability. We've made the damn man a household word.
Just last week, the West German parliament passed a law making it illegal to deny the Holocaust has taken place.
Just as Zundel had predicted, his pending deportation was stalled because he appealed his conviction, much to the discomfort of his Jewish detractors, who were counting on Germany's new law, the infamous Paragraph 130, that punishes, in layman's terms, the defamation of the memory of the dead.
Legal snag is developed in the Zundel situation. He could be ordered deported by the immigration authorities, but he is still on bail and technically before the courts, so they can't throw him out today.
I'm not as easy a guy to get rid of.
Immigration laws suspend the deportation order until Zundel's case is heard by the Immigration Appeal Board. The order is also canceled out by a condition of the bail granted pending Zundel's criminal appeal, a condition that he not leave Canada.
Zundel's lawyer, Lauren Marshall, says his criminal appeal is complex, 29 points of law, and will take some time.
Well, basically, we can't carry out a deportation order until the matter that's before the courts has been settled.
Zundel's printing presses continue to roll here at his home and office in downtown Toronto, churning out material like this letter to members of Parliament. Zundel will know within a few days when the Immigration Appeal Board will hear his case, and it's possible that both his immigration appeal and his criminal appeal could be heard at the same time, perhaps early this summer. In Toronto, Dan Rath, TV 11 Newsroom.
The Holocaust ended up on trial with Zundel in a heated 2-month hearing. At issue, a Zundel publication, Did 6 Million Jews Really Die?
If a new trial would be ordered, I think it would be a travesty for the community, not only the Jewish community, but the community as a whole. I'd much rather see this issue settled the way I had always wanted it, in democratic debate, some symposiums at university where Germans, Jews, and so on can get together, neutral arbitrator in between. We look at our documents, we compare, and that's it.
The last trial evoked a tremendous effect, damage particular to Holocaust survivors and to the Jewish community generally. We paid a very high penalty. Why should this overwhelming evidence be brought into question by an individual in a public forum? Why should we give Mr. Zundel a chance to, in a public forum, spout his lies and ill-conceived ideas?
Well, it's a legal concept. It's called judicial notice. Something like the Holocaust, you have to prove. The interesting part is...
You have to prove it again because it's a new trial.
Deanie, if somebody came out and wrote that there was no such thing as the Magna Carta or the Civil War, the American Civil War did not exist, and said something about it, and that there was a trial spreading false news, the Crown Attorney would have to prove that the Civil War did happen.
Okay, but surely, I mean, if they didn't use that film, there's got to be all kinds of films. I mean, there is such a huge body of evidence that it can't be that difficult.
Well, there's the Holocaust survivors, and they would have to come up once again. But that was the most important piece of Crown evidence.
Good evening. The Ontario Court of Appeal has ordered a new trial for Toronto publisher Ernst Zundel. Zundel had been facing prison and deportation after a 1985 conviction for publishing anti-Jewish literature. But the Court of Appeal says there were errors made at his trial.
We get more on the story from CFTO's Peter Durant.
Zundel, who was out on bail pending the outcome of the appeal, was in good spirits today as he arrived at the Dawn jail to turn himself in.
For those who marched to Stalingrad, a visit to Toronto Stone Jail is nothing.
Ernst Zundel's appeal is over. The 5-judge panel has preserved judgment. Chief Justice William Howland says significant legal issues were raised during the week-long appeal.
Ernst Zundel, a Toronto pamphleteer, is asking the Supreme Court of Ontario to overturn his conviction for spreading false news about the Holocaust. Zundel's lawyer has argued that his client has a right to express his opinion, but the Crown contends, in this case, that is not in the best interests of society.
Good evening. Ernst Zundel is getting a new trial on charges of spreading false news.
We're obviously disappointed. However, we certainly are pleased that the court has found that Section 177 is applicable, and we don't have the judgment as yet. When we do have it, we'll study the judgment and certainly convey to the Crown our opinion as to what we think they should do next.
The unexpected news also caused consternation in the Jewish community. The charges against Zundel had originally been brought by Sabina Citron of the Holocaust Remembrance Association.
It's just a great shame that the years we have spent already working on it, you know, the energy has to be put out again, and I, for the love of me, I cannot understand why. And this is a man who's not even a citizen of Canada. Why can't we simply deport him and get rid of him?
And a very good Monday evening, everyone. Ernst Zundel is free on bail.
At Osgood Hall, Zundel was granted bail at $10,000 on the condition that he not print or distribute the pamphlet, Did 6 Million Really Die? Members of the Jewish Defense League who had clashed with Zundel and his supporters at his 1985 trial are outraged.
Don't allow the court to be a stage for hate mongers.
Ontario's Attorney General says he will decide by the end of the week what to do next in the Ernst Zundel case, a new court case that will be, as he put it, a trial to be remembered.
It's Monday, and this is Ontario's most watched nightly newscast, Nightbeat News.
Toronto publisher Ernst Zundel spent the weekend in the Dawn jail despite an appeal court decision granting him a new trial on charges of spreading false news about the Holocaust. Zundel was freed today on $10,000 bail. He was greeted by supporters late this afternoon as he walked to freedom.
The Ernst Zundel crisis.
I will not let the children in Ontario or in Canada be held hostages by what I consider is a historical lie.
The Holocaust occurred, and the jury found that it occurred, and the Court of Appeal didn't question that part of the decision. I'm not at all worried about Mr. Zundel and his views.
Would you charge him again?
We'll deal with that when we come to it.
In the last week, Ian Scott met with members of various Jewish groups across the city. And while he says their input was helpful, he says his decision to go to the Supreme Court of Canada was based solely on legal concerns.
I have never thrown bombs. I've never hit anybody. I'm a non-violent person. My whole record is Gandhi-like in this struggle. So if these people are giving me the opportunity of a lifetime, maybe it is eternal and godlike justice at work.
Mr. Zundel is going to try and get his mug on television, regardless of what we do. You know that, and I know that.
Despite the pain the continued fight might bring, Charles Zayon says it's necessary.
People might go away with the impression that Mr. Zundel, the hate propaganda and the kind of thing that he espouses were true if we didn't continue and pursue this issue through the courts.
But civil libertarian Alan Borovoy has repeatedly fought against dragging Zundel into the courts again.
It's not the place to debate with a peripheral non-entity, to debate his loony theories with him. I think the Attorney General could have made a very strong and very eloquent statement about that could have been very valuable.
If the Attorney General's move eventually leads to a retrial, there is nothing Ernst Zundel would like more. He'll welcome any chance he gets to once again propagate his views about the Jewish Holocaust. Brenda Craig, CBC News, Toronto.
After much legal wrangling, a new trial date was set. The second Great Holocaust trial started in January 1988 and lasted for 4 months. Its most important outcome was what later came to be known as the Loyster Report, the first scientific on-site investigation ever of the location claimed to have been the site of the mass murder of millions of Jews by gassing. Here, Zundel talks about meeting Europe's foremost Holocaust researcher, Dr. Robert Foresson, at the first International Revisionist Conference in California in 1979, a meeting that resulted in a deep personal friendship based on mutual respect and admiration. It led to an important collaboration lasting to this day.
Dr. Foresson had said to me, we can solve the mystery of the gas chambers in Auschwitz and all these other places if we find an American expert, because America is the only country that dispatches people with gas. The lecture towards the end showed an American gas chamber in Maryland and an explanation
that an American official in that particular prison facility had given to Dr. Forison of how difficult it was to gas a person in the United States.
In 1988, in the middle of the second Great Holocaust trial, the Zundel team decided to send Fred Leuchter to Auschwitz to investigate the ruins for Zyklon B, the poison claimed to have been used to gas 6 million Jews.
Dr. Forison flew to Boston, met Fred Leuchter in the middle of my second trial. In the middle of my second trial. He reported back to me, "Oh mon Dieu, oh my God, Ernst, Leuchter believes in the Holocaust." He said he believes that there were all these gas chambers.
When I first heard about the trial, my assumption was that Mr. Zundel perhaps didn't know what he was talking about. But what concerned me more was the fact that Mr. Zundel had a right to discuss and to think anything he wanted. And I was concerned about the freedom of speech issue. I had assumed that Canada had the same freedom of speech provisions that we have in the United States, and of course I subsequently found out this wasn't true. I also was very concerned when I found out that I was the only person with the expertise to examine these facilities and ensure that Mr. Zundel got a fair trial.
Did you have any preconceived notions before leaving for Poland? And I guess to follow up that, what did you actually expect to find when you got over there?
I expected to find viable gas execution chambers. And even though I had seen the documentation in Toronto, I'm not sure I really believed it all. And I honestly expected to find gas chambers and equipment capable of being utilized for gas execution purposes. I was working in a communist country, a totalitarian country, that for some 40-odd years had worked to suppress the truth. And I was not uncomfortable at all in working under their noses to promulgate the truth to anyone who wanted to hear it. I told Mr. Zundel and his defense team prior to my going that if I did in fact find facilities that could have supported executions, not only whether they did support the executions, but only whether or not they could have sustained gas executions, I would make that very clear in my report, and that is what I would testify to when I testified in court. With the exception of the video photographer, I brought the same things that I would have normally brought to a prison in the United States if I was doing a survey of their equipment. The draftsman was there to take and verify measurements. The drawings were made on site and then reproduced when we returned to the United States to document everything we saw. I personally made photographs and produced a great deal of photographic evidence of the hardware and facilities that we found in Poland. And the video photographer, which was not a normal thing for me, was brought to document the fact that the forensic samples that I removed from the facilities, the control sample from delousing facility number 1 at Birkenau, and all of the other samples from the alleged gas execution rooms were properly taken, packaged for submission to the laboratories. I examined the facilities and I made a determination that they were incapable of supporting the use of hydrogen cyanide gas for purposes of execution or otherwise. But additionally, it would be necessary to remove samples, return them to the United States for testing at an independent laboratory to in fact confirm what my visual inspection indicated, that these facilities never in fact contained hydrogen cyanide gas.
What aside from the samples convinced you that these facilities could not have been used then or now as execution facilities?
The samples in my mind were mainly corroborative. The reasons that I determined that these facilities were not or never could have been gas execution facilities are stated in my report. And it mainly is concerned with the design and fabrication of these facilities. the requirements necessary in the design of a facility that contains a highly explosive and highly poisonous gas. You must have gasketed doors, no windows, means of getting the gas in, means of getting the gas out, something for heating the gas and the air to constantly keep the right temperature, explosion-proof switches, lighting facilities, etc. None of these ever existed. We're talking about brick and mortar buildings without heat, with non-explosion proof lighting, without gasketed doors, in some cases without doors at all, and with crematories that opened very close or adjacent to the facility. If these facilities were used for gas execution facilities, if those persons operating the facilities didn't gas themselves to death at the same time that the executees died, they certainly would have been blown to bits when the gas exploded from a spark arc in a switch, the heat of a light bulb, or the gas approaching and getting into the crematory furnace. I mean, it's just ludicrous to consider that these facilities could have been used as gas chambers.
Well, we all know from reading the newspapers and watching TV that there's many Holocaust survivors who say that they actually saw gassings. They describe them in minute detail, which relative it was they lost, down to the color of the corpses and the color of the smoke coming out of the chimney. How do you respond to these people?
Well, one of the things that was necessary for me to do, Kirk, at the outset, so I'd have an understanding of what I was doing, was read the literature and alleged eyewitness reports, so I could make a determination of the protocol, which, that's a fancy word that we use in terms of executions for determining for what the actual procedure is for the execution. And I found through these investigations that there is no such a thing as an eyewitness. I have never seen a report that was written by anyone who had a valid description of what could have happened at a gassing. So the long and the short of it is, there are no eyewitnesses because there were no gassings.
Fred Leuchter was a very good witness. His unexpected appearance threw the prosecution into a tailspin and almost derailed the trial. However, the judge took cover under judicial notice, stating emphatically in lay language, the Holocaust happened, period. He sentenced Ernst Zundel again, this time to 18 months. Again, there were numerous stages of appeal and repeated attempts to get Zundel deported. On August 27, 1992, the Supreme Court of Canada acquitted Zundel and struck down the false news law as a violation of the guarantee to free speech contained in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The court's decision read as follows. Section 2B of the Charter protects the right of a minority to express its view, however unpopular it may be. The content of the communication is irrelevant. The purpose of the guarantee is to permit free expression to the end of promoting truth, political or social participation, and self-fulfillment. That protection extends to the views of minorities that the majority regards as wrong or false. After 9 years of litigation, Ernst Zundel emerged as the victor.
Let me see, that's maybe, what's her name? Sabina Citron. Hello? Hello? Jewish hate call. I always knew they were poor losers. All right, so I suppose it's now, after 9 years, that I can destroy my bail papers. I also hope that this document of shame for Canada can be torn up, which prevented me from exercising my human rights for the last 9 years.
The organized Jewish community of Toronto refused to accept the verdict of the Supreme Court of Canada and the right of Zundel to peacefully express his opinions on World War II history concerning German treatment of the Jews. Sabina Citron was quoted as saying, "I'm just beginning to fight." 4 days after Zundel's acquittal, a delegation of several high officers of the Canadian Jewish Congress formally laid a complaint with Toronto police, alleging that Zundel had incited hatred in media interviews given after his acquittal.
This law from 1275 was on our law books used by these Jews against me, which the government paid for. The Jewish community didn't persecute me and prosecute me with their own money. They got the taxpayers of Ontario to foot the bill. I had to defend myself with my own money. It took 9 years to get a 7-sentence decision and definition out of the highest court in the land. And for 9 years we went through this rigmarole. Every time we appeared in court, my country lawyer said, this is against the Charter of Rights, this is against freedom of speech. Every judge virtually knocked us down, till finally after 9 years, the 7 best legal minds in the country looked at this, and the majority, 4 of them said,
the content of the communication is irrelevant.
These people are trying to extort from me, a human being, with all the same rights that they claim for themselves. A behavior pattern, a thought pattern, and an outlook on history which I will not adopt. The Canadian Criminal Code is very clear about that. To extort means to force somebody to do something which he does not want to do. And when I pointed that out to the police and to the prosecutors, because it is politically incorrect, I got the short shrift. Well, that was before the internet. 70 million people are waiting to be informed. And the electronic media has somewhat leveled the playing field, because now little people have a chance to also challenge the big boys, so far still unfettered on an international medium. And this is no wonder to me that the forces of censorship represented by people like the Simon Wiesenthal Center, both in Toronto and in the United States, are storming the Senate, the Congress, and Parliament Hill, once again to censor the hate mongers quote. Well, I would hate too if I was somebody that had conned the public for 50 years with nothing but lies posing as history. I would also be hating the message of truth.
The previous year, Ernst Zundel had met a California-based ethnic novelist at the Institute for Historical Review's 10th International Convention. Ingrid Remlin, also of German ancestry, had experienced World War II as a refugee child from the Ukraine.
One really doesn't quite know whether one should have begun the book by your life in South America to get a better perspective. And I'd like to do this in this interview because it, in a way, introduces you. It's such an incredible tale that things like these only normally happen to heroines in fictitious accounts of long-forgotten histories.
Yes.
In your case, it's basically looking at your life and your world through your own eyes.
When they met, Ingrid made a living as a freelance writer and convention speaker. She had never heard of Holocaust revisionism before, and the convention was her first exposure to an alternate interpretation of German history. Zundel invited her to come to Canada and see his outreach operation. At that time, they barely knew each other, but that was soon to change. At this point, the struggle between the Holocaust lobby and Ernst Zundel went underground. The street mob was mobilized against him. There were numerous demonstrations outside the Zundel house, during which paint bombs and plastic bags with feces were hurled against the building. Toronto police warned Zundel that a price of $800 was set on his head. Posters by the thousands calling for Zundel's assassination appeared all over Toronto. These posters showed his face in the crosshairs of a rifle, giving his address and instructions on how to build a cocktail bomb.
What these people are hearing is not to their liking, and it's designed to be not to their liking, because they are not nice people. They are not nice people. Today is siege day, demonstration day at the Voice of Freedom. What we have outside our building is a demonstration by a motley crew. These are what they call the anti-racist activists, which were financed by the Metro Toronto City Council to the tune of $8,000. So what you actually see today is what $8,000 will buy. State-financed intimidation. They announced on their posters they're going to have a kosher barbecue. We will continue to inform the world. It is our right. It is in Canada constitutionally guaranteed, and we will not be easily silenced or muzzled. And the only way that I'm going to leave this place where I have lived, worked, toiled, thought, and spoken and broadcast for the last 38 years is in handcuffs or in a coffin.
On May 8, 1995, on the 50th anniversary of Germany's surrender to the Allies, ending World War II, the Zundel House went up in flames.
There is a very big war going on. There is violence being done against the rights of people who want to just speak their mind. It doesn't matter what you say, it's who you are. And once you've been vilified, they want to run you out of town, destroy you, take your job, destroy your business, and create absolute hell in your life. Why? Because it'll be a salutary lesson to anyone else who dares to raise their head in disagreement. What's the difference between this and any other totalitarian regime?
Both he and I had been wartime children. We know what war not only looks like, but smells like. And when I walked into that house, that smelled of war. And I thought, you know, here we are 50 years later and we are still at war. We were sitting and having breakfast, and Ernst saves anything that he can save. You know, he doesn't ever throw anything away. So one of his morning robes had survived the fire. The house was awful. There were big holes in the ceiling, and it was raining in there. And he says, sure, everything survived, even my handkerchief. And he pulls it out, and he pulls a half-burned envelope out of his pocket. And he says, some supporter gave this to me prior to the fire. And we had talked about the fact that I was really struggling financially there in Toronto, in San Diego. And so he looks at this, half of the bills are burned, and he says, you want to take it? And he gave it to me, and it was $750. And I looked at him, I said, what do you want me to do for this? And he says, why don't you start a website? And that's what I did. I took that money and I went and I did some seminars. and slowly learned the construction of a website. He had absolutely nothing to do with it. In fact, he was so busy rebuilding the house, dealing with all his enemies and so on. He was barely aware of what I was doing. I called it the Zundel site. I wanted to do something for the cause. So that he was later put on trial by the Human Rights Commission for that website is ludicrous. He had nothing to do with it. He had nothing to do with it. I did it. I was actually sore at him that he didn't help me more, especially after the censorship came, when Germany got into the act and blocked not only my website, which happened the next year, but the entire Webcom server.
By early March, the government of Germany was beaten back by university student volunteers all over the world who copied the Zundel site content and mirrored it on their very own websites. The cyber dogs were being called off. The Zundel site had won the day.
You know, I did not appreciate that when Ingrid Rimland started out.
Really?
These
Why?
diagrams, yeah. No, in the beginning I thought, number one, how many people will know about this website? In the beginning it looked as if the internet was not going to pay for itself, you know. It just was not cost effective. But along came our enemies who were utterly spooked, you know, upset, because they sniffed like people that are cornered, liars about to be found out. They struck back at a time when we were not even ready. Ingrid was just learning this, and I was a dumb clock sitting up here in Canada.
You mean Ingrid Rimland?
Ingrid Rimland, yeah. She was as unprepared, certainly I was unprepared for the reaction. And what happened is the enemy's actions against us made the Zundel site world-renowned. One million German subscribers to Deutsche Telekom suddenly were cut off. It was amazing. Every hour I got these reports faxed to me, telephoned to me. There is now a mirror site in Stanford University. There is another one at MIT. There is another one in Texas. There is another one in Pittsburgh. It was a dream come true. And so I was sitting back in Toronto. I had calls from Magdeburg. I had calls from Munich. I had a fax from one of Germany's most decorated World War II heroes, and from Frankfurt. And then we had a call during the night saying that now there is one of your mirror sites in Australia. Finally, one of them wrote a letter to Deutsche Telekom. And here is what he said. Dear Deutsche Telekom,
my friend, that it's not over, girl, until we win. No, it's not over till our adversary's down for the count.
And it was signed by a man whom I have never met. And this is where we were very lucky, because not millions of dollars worth invested in propaganda and advertising could have achieved what this censorship attempt achieved for us. That's number one. Number two, her daily Z-grams, Zundelgrams, that she sends out. I thought, because I know how much effort it is to write a newsletter, and she frequently writes Z-grams that are in printed form 7-8 pages long. It was a Herculean task, and of course I didn't know enough about this lady, but I honestly, quite honestly, thought there is no way that one person, with all the other work she's doing, could sustain such a tremendous literary effort because it amounts to approximately 365 days a year multiplied by 6, 7, 8 pages. This is a massive effort. You have to research it, you have to type it, you have to correct it, you have to format it. This is one massive job. And you know, it's interesting. The enemies read her with such attention. It is an amazing thing. She posted something last Friday on the internet website. On Tuesday, the Jewish lawyers were absolutely up in arms about it in the courtroom. They read with such care what is being said, and even better than that, media people, big media people, Toronto Star media people, have quoted verbatim sentences out of Z-grams within days of them appearing on that Zundel site. So make no mistake about it. This site is being monitored and is being looked at and is being taken very seriously. That's her big achievement. Simon Wiesenthal Center received from the state of California $900,000 US to help with their website. They cannot claim such freshness. People from Russia can read, did 6 million really die in Russian?
In the early months of 1996, Ingrid Zundel's site became the most visited website in cyberspace. Every day she sent her Z-grams out to thousands. She offered documents in many languages. For weeks, the Zundel site's visitor counter was larger than that of mainstream media sources such as the New York Times, the Washington Post, and television giants such as ABC, NBC, and CBS.
This is a tremendous liberation movement. It's liberation through information. We could not have done and achieved what we achieved without the help of thousands of people who will be forever unknown, who have quietly put money in an envelope and sent it to us. How often has money arrived in my bank or at my house or been given to me, like during the first trial when a total stranger, absolutely anonymous, I've never known the man before, never seen him since, handed a manila envelope to one of my men.
I remember this.
And we were afraid it was...
I was a witness of this.
And we thought it was
Yes.
possibly a bomb, and so we carefully, with a long stick, with a knife, opened up this thing, and what fell out was nothing but money. It's not the barbarian anteportas, it's the revisionists anteportas. You know, we are at their heels. In human destiny, we all have roles to play, and we are vessels. You know, we fulfill a function. We are condemned to win. The genie is out of the bottle. And I'm absolutely convinced, although for the moment we are in a very tricky, dangerous situation, that we have already passed the age of repression. And the perception is, these are people of yesterday. These Jews with their noses in the garbage dumps of history, or lifting the lid on garbage and say, oh, they did me wrong. They are out of touch. And it's very interesting that some of the more wise, older leaders of the Jewish community have this very clear perception that what they're messing with is something very dangerous. The role of German people in the last 50 years has been one of continued victimization. We want to get that behind us. We don't want this Auschwitz club to be held over us like a Damoclean sword constantly. Yeah, we have changed the world. I see the lawyer for the B'nai B'rith, the lawyers for the Simon Wiesenthal Center, the lawyers for the Holocaust Remembrance Association, the lawyers for the mayor of Toronto, the lawyer for the Human Rights Commission who happens to be Jewish. All these famous, and the Canadian Jewish Congress, the largest Canadian Jewish organization, they're all sitting there, and they're all like the snake and the mongoose. I see their hands tremble visibly. When I watch their feet, I watch their feet tremble. This is not the sign of people who are convinced that they are invincible. Believe me, I am certainly far more convinced that I am the voice of the future in that place than these people are. We will do it. We will liberate our own kind, our own people, our own culture and civilization. I really believe it. I really believe it. Every day I see the signs that we are on the road to liberation. And I'm absolutely content and happy with my role, that I should be so lucky, the peasant boy from the Black Forest, to be given by history the role of popularizing the liberation of my own people. The liberation through truth. Our world no longer is in dire need of historians. It needs healers to heal the psyche of people who have been abused. Our sons and our grandsons are not lesser people. They're cut from the same cloth, and they're signs that our sons will rise to the occasions to defend their families just like we did ours, and to defend their pride, maybe no longer their countries, because now we think and feel in larger spaces. It's now more or less global. And so I have found, as you know, we have found in our community of historical revisionists people from all races, people of all ages, people of different stations in life, simple people, clever people, trained people, scholars with titles, and humble peasants. And we have all done our job. And boy, I'm telling you, if you think that we have not wrestled world power Zion to a standstill, Dr. Forrison, do you understand what that means? Presidents of countries tremble with abject fear and surrender before these lobbies. Elie Wiesel sat in the White House by the fireplace, wagging his finger at President Reagan, who promptly caved in. Clinton, disgusting. German chancellor after German chancellor, as you say, dropped their pants. But Ingrid Rimland, lady, newcomer to revisionist, every morning, people from the Canadian Jewish Congress, Marvin Kurtz, the lawyer who raised the Zed Graham in the courtroom, Freiman from the Human Rights Commission, every morning, when they quickly run to their computer to read what the lady has to say, she does not cower. She's not a president of a country. She doesn't command an air force with an atomic bomb. She has no strike force, no Marines to be landing someplace. She is a lady with a computer, and she is supported by friends. And she will help, like we do, to set the world free. What an honor. What an honor to do that. How many people are called in history and given the opportunity to do that?
And I offered my services without any guile and without having anything up my sleeve. I simply wanted to contribute my part of it. And it was only when I realized how viciously revisionists are persecuted that it became a campaign in my mind. Up to then it was only, why don't I tell the other side of the story? But you unleash something that is unreal when you talk about the German side of what is now known as the Holocaust. We have our own memories, our own history, our own stories. We are not obligated to adopt and to inherit and to integrate the stories that the Jewish people tell. They can have their stories, we have our stories. Everybody has their own stories. So I never felt obligated to actually buy into the Holocaust story. When I was younger than I am today, I kind of believed in it, just as Ernst did. I thought that in the havoc of the years, toward the end of the war, the Germans were so pressed for resources, and the roads were bombed and the houses were bombed, and there was havoc all over Europe. And I thought the Jews ran away and the Germans did away with them. I really believed that. Everybody believes it to this day. But when I realized that it was a monumental hoax, I felt an obligation to my German people, to the European people, to help spread the word about what actually happened according to forensic evidence, according to scientific evidence.
if the Canadian Jewish Congress is able to stifle this website in my country, you guys had better flee, go over the wall, and go someplace in a hurry.
The object of the exercise is to compel Mr. Zundel not to have a means of communication. Why is that? Perhaps it is the case that those who want to prohibit the average citizen from hearing directly would like to only have the public know what the major media want them to know about the views of Ernst Zundel. And a telecommunication facility located in California is not usually considered to be subject to the jurisdiction of Parliament. We don't normally consider our regulations to apply to American communications. But there's an attempt being made to do this. And bizarre as it may sound, thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars are being spent at the behest of the government of Canada and its whatever motivates it to accomplish this end. You'd have to have a particularly diabolically twisted mind to think there wasn't something wrong with that. It's making a gulag out of Canada. The commission lawyer, Mr. Fryman, said to allow truth to be raised by one accused under Human Rights Tribunal would be an abomination. And he further said that it would be sacrilege of the Human Rights Act. Notice the terms. Those terms are religious terms. This is a new state religion. It's a state-sanctioned religion, and this, in effect, is the Inquisition, the equivalent of the Inquisition in modern times, to restrict, to eliminate, to silence religious heresy.
Why do I then, on the 9th of December, stand in front of one more Canadian judge because of what I said as a member of a minority? I am not asking the Jews to sanctify what I say, but I am demanding as a German to have the right to tell my people's history from our vantage point. I just happen to be not a Jew that has an outlook like a Jew on history. For the next 9 years, I'm going to go once again through the courts. On the other side is this immensely well-connected Jewish community with all the money in the world and all the lawyers in the telephone book. And they have the parasitic angle on getting the Canadian taxpayer once again to persecute me because they don't like what I say. Well, I say to them, the hell with you.
On January 19, 2000, Ernst and Ingrid were quietly married in California during one of their trips along the West Coast. Both were fatigued from the long struggle. They realized that they could not win the Human Rights Tribunal war since truth was not deemed to be a defense. It did not matter to the Human Rights Tribunal what the facts were. The only thing that mattered was that someone's feelings were claimed to be hurt. As one revisionist put it, the Jewish Holocaust is the only genocide that is proven by countless survivors. Ernst and Ingrid wanted to regroup, rethink the struggle, and redirect their energies. On one of their cross-country trips, they passed through Tennessee on a blistering day, and, on a whim, decided to look at some real estate in the vicinity of the Smoky Mountains, one of America's most beautiful national parks.
It was so terribly hot outside and it was so cool inside, and Ernst looked out and saw the mountains over there, and he says, you know, this is just like home. And we bought this house within half an hour.
In compliance with U.S. immigration law, officials gave Zundel a social security number, a work permit, and a document allowing him to leave the U.S. and return unmolested. He was fingerprinted by the FBI. He underwent a health check and was told the final step would be an interview with U.S. immigration to ascertain that he and Ingrid were legally married. He was informed that such an interview might take up to 3 years and that no interim status report would be issued. Only years later were they to find out that Ernst's political enemies were stalking their prey from day one on American soil, and that the infamous U.S. Patriot Act would be the tool allowing them to pounce.
1 month after Ernst and Ingrid settled in Tennessee, Criminal Commissar Kolsch working out of the BKA office in Meckenheim, Germany, emailed the following to various contacts. Canadian security authorities have informed us that Ernst Zundel is currently residing in the USA. It is not clear whether the above address is a permanent address or merely a transitory place of residence. Please note that we have also notified your sister service. The Holocaust lobby and its collaborators in the corridors of power knew that Zundel's German passport was due to expire. They waited patiently. Once it expired, someone with access to his immigration file destroyed 2 letters written by his immigration lawyer requesting that a date be set for his important final interview. Contacts within the Jewish community in Canada were helpfully informed through an email written by an official named Kubart and circulated widely by Criminal Commissar Sabine Kull of the BKA in Meckenheim. Since a German passport issued in Canada has in the meantime expired, and since he must apply for a new one, the processing state prosecutor in Mannheim requests that the passport be refused under the terms of Section 7, Paragraph 1, Number 2.
It was engineered, it was manufactured.
Thanks to the Freedom of Information Act and other sources, the Zundels have collected 2 file cabinets full of documentation on letterheads from various embassies and consulates in Berlin, Toronto, Ottawa, Atlanta, and Washington, D.C. They have also gathered information from immigration and naturalization agencies in the U.S. and Canada located in Knoxville, Memphis, New Orleans, Toronto, and Ottawa, as well as law enforcement agencies such as the Bundeskriminalamt of Germany, also known as BKA in Meckenheim, Mannheim, Baden, Württemberg, as well as BKA liaison officers in Ottawa and Washington, D.C. Other sources include the Department of Justice in Washington, the Department of Justice of Canada, the Canadian Royal Mounted Police, and even Interpol. They also gathered information from spy agencies such as the Canadian Security Intelligence Services in Toronto and Homeland Security in Washington, D.C. Helmut Haus of the Meckenheim BKA explained to Leslie Peters at the Canadian Embassy in Berlin, extradition of Ernst Zundel for the offenses of which he stands accused has thus far proven impossible. Paul Urich, head of legal services of Canadian Immigration and Naturalization, wrote gleefully to CSIS counsel Murray Rodeich. This move to the U.S. might provide CIC with grounds for potential enforcement action under S-24 of the Immigration Act. Temple Black of Memphis Immigration Headquarters had this to say to his colleagues. Now that the headquarters' special case lawyers have focused on this story, I'll have to be even more careful with the information I release. Cheers. Ian Taylor, an attorney for the Canadian Human Rights Commission, contacted Roger Payette of Canadian Immigration and asked him to find something useful. In other words, he wanted him to dig up some dirt. He received the following reply. This is one of the cleanest files I have ever had the pleasure of checking. 2 secretive FBI meetings were held in Sevier County, where Ernst and Ingrid had settled. FBI Special Agent Scott Nowinski reported to his superiors, "Since there is no indication that Ernst Zundel is, or ever has been, involved in any acts of violence, acts of domestic terrorism, or any other criminal activity within the United States, we recommend that this case be closed administratively."
Now we can see a new world coming into view. A world in which there is the very real prospect of a new world order.
The New World Order does not mean surrendering our national sovereignty or forfeiting our interests.
That was the opportunity Ernst Zundel's enemies needed. What vicious mainstream media, repeated attempts at assassination, the shameless use of courts and human rights commissions and their corrupt tribunals could not accomplish, was in the end accomplished through a political kidnapping disguised as a visa overstay.
A Georgetown University law professor who helped craft the scandalous Patriot Act was asked by a reporter,
An estimated 5,000 people have been subjected to detention since 9/11. Of those, only 5, 3 non-citizens and 2 citizens, were charged with terrorism-related crimes, and 1 was convicted. How do we justify such broad sweeping legislation that has resulted in very few terrorist-related convictions?
It may well be that a number of citizens were not charged with terrorism-related crimes, but they need not be. Where the department has suspected people of terrorism, it will prosecute those persons for other violations of law, rather than wait for a terrorist conspiracy to fully develop and risk the potential that that conspiracy will be missed.
On February 5th, 2003, Ernst Zundel was arrested in front of his home by 5 officials of the U.S. government. The excuse was that he had missed a hearing and thereby had abandoned his claim to U.S. immigrant status. Zundel was arrested as an illegal alien who was in the U.S. without a visa and a legal passport.
I was in my office. My husband was working on his paintings because we had bought a gallery and he wanted to open it in 2 weeks, so he was framing his pictures when I heard some noise outside, and there were several vehicles. 5 men had surrounded my husband. Some of them had uniforms on, some of them were visibly armed. They looked very threatening to me. My husband turned to me and said, "These people say I missed a hearing." Ernst had already emptied his pockets. He put all his small change and the money and his documents and the bills, whatever he had in his pockets, on the trunk of the car. And they shoved a paper in front of him and said, "Sign this." And I didn't even know what it was, but I said to my husband, "Don't you think you should call an attorney?" And they said that's not allowed. And then I said, "Can I call my attorney?" And they said, "No, you can't." There was never an arrest warrant. There was never anything that we were notified that this was going to happen. They came like bandits into our property, arrested my husband like a common criminal, and took him away. And I saw him once, a week later, for 15 minutes, after a huge struggle in Blount County, because they didn't want me to see him. And that is the last I knew. I have never to this day been notified by INS why my husband was arrested. After several weeks went by and I tried to move heaven and earth to get some information, I went to the sheriff of Sevier County and said, "Did you have an arrest warrant?" And at first he said he did. And then I said, "I would like to have a copy of it." And then he backed off and said, "No, he didn't, but he heard it being read." And then I said, "That's strange, because I was there and so was my handyman, and we didn't hear anything being read to my husband." And at that point he said, "Well, no, he didn't hear it either, but the guys had badges."
The Zundels have collected thousands of pages of additional documents, revealing names, dates, and titles of numerous collaborators. Many of these documents are marked secret, for internal use only, and extremely urgent. These include letters, phone numbers, faxes, emails, memoranda, handwritten notes, and even illegal ex parte communication between immigration and district and appeals courts using Anti-Defamation League smear sheets to impugn Ernst Zundel's character and motivation. Evidence shows it was a plan approved and rubber-stamped at the very highest government levels in 3 countries on 2 continents, namely Canada, Germany, and the United States of America. The Zundels strongly suspect that Israel was also involved.
My husband was taken over to Canada, and since there was no arrest warrant in Canada, they didn't know what they were to do with him, so they very quickly dreamed up this idea that he was a security risk for the state of Canada. He has lived there for 42 years. He has never been a risk for the people of Canada. Why all of a sudden, after he left Canada, did he become a risk?
Ernst Zundel suffered 2 long, brutal years in total isolation in one of Canada's most notorious prisons, the Toronto West Detention Centre, also known as Abu Ghraib North. He was kept in an ice-cold cell where the lights were never turned off. His bed sheets were not changed in 3 months. He was not allowed to speak to any other prisoners. In a trial allowing secret testimony by faceless witnesses and no cross-examination of what they had said, he was branded a security risk to Canada and ordered to be deported. Thus, in the end, 3 so-called democratic countries, cooperating furtively, believed they all had their ducks in a row. It will suffice to give the flavor of a political kidnapping, in post-9/11 parlance known as extrajudicial rendition, by using a few sentences lifted from these documents as samples. Dr. Andreas Zimmer, Deputy Consul General of the Federal Republic of Germany, Atlanta, reported to his embassy colleagues in Washington, D.C., Mrs. Zundel informs us that an extradition request has also now been received from Israel. We wish to request instructions for further action. BKA liaison Oliver Blodorn of the Federal Republic of Germany Embassy in Washington notified Canadian authorities that BK agents will pick Zundel up in order to avoid any possible release or deportation to a third-party country. Jessica Fernandez of the General Consulate of Germany in Toronto gave further details to BKA Criminal Commissar Sabine Kohl in Meckenheim that a date had been set and a chartered private plane stood ready. She added in a postscript, "Important, the Canadian side is asking for us to keep quiet about this to the press until Zundel is officially handed over to the German authorities." The embassies in Ottawa and Washington were informed accordingly. The plane's ID was Challenger 604, ID number CGLBB. 7 officers accompanied the lifelong pacifist as though he were a rabid criminal, including Supervisor Gordon Morris, Enforcement Officer Brock Mitchell, and RCMP Constable Sean Culligan. The ticket of this charter plane to the taxpayers of Canada was an estimated $250,000. Shortly thereafter, the plane was sold and its ID changed. No records could be discovered about who owned the plane. The Mannheim court was standing by to sentence Ernst Zundel to a maximum sentence by using the draconian paragraph 130 for incitement of the people and for the defamation of the memory of the dead.
Whenever I try to contact officials, congressmen, senators, they all run around with a fig leaf. They're afraid to touch this. If somebody comes and smashes my window, I can go to the police and I can expect an investigation. If somebody comes and smashes my life, it seems I have no recourse. I cannot get answers to what has happened. Somebody has got to take an interest in this, that a man was kidnapped in broad daylight on American soil who was here legally.
Every time I think about the damage that's been done, the The anger wells inside me till I'm almost overcome. I want to tear the moon out of the sky and drop the sun. Why do I feel so all alone, like I'm the only one? Even though your eyes are open, they may never ever see. Your mind may never comprehend this sinful subtlety. Your heart may never hunger for the truth that sets you free. Your soul may know the darkness of divine eternity. Like petty thieves who plunder in the shadows of the night, they break inside and enter through the windows of your mind. How can I control this poisoning of the soul? These lies that blind your eyes, blinded by the lies. Have your eyes been blinded by the lies? Have your eyes been blinded by the lies? Yes, your eyes are blinded by the lies. Yes, your eyes are blinded by the lies. Your mind has been made up for you by people you don't know, whose thought machine controls the scene so well it doesn't show. How can I contain this anguish and this pain, knowing